My name is Eleanor Ward. I'm a systems designer, a founder, and for most of my life, the only woman in any room where the money was real. I built Wardline Technologies from my basement in the late 90s, coding in stolen hours between diaper changes and hospital shifts. My husband didn't make it past year 5. He said I had ambition in place of affection. Maybe I did. I built the company on caffeine, instinct, and a kind of quiet fury that only women like me understand. I thought if I gave everything, my body, my mind, my name, then one day my son would inherit something unshakable. I didn't know that legacy, in the hands of the entitled, curdles into weaponry. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. We are on a journey to our first 100 subscribers, and it will be an honor to have you as part of it. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jane Sanders from Alabama. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. It started gradually. Small, almost affectionate undermining. My son Julian joined the company straight out of Wharton. He had his father's jaw and my will. Everyone said he was the future. He had the posture, the charm, the kind of smile that made venture capitalists forget he hadn't built a damn thing yet. I let him in slowly. One title, then another. At first, I thought the jokes were just nerves. Mom, you can't keep printing on paper like it's 2003. Aha. Then came the subtle power plays. Project budgets rerouted without my sign-off. Key meetings rescheduled without me. I watched him take up more space, more time, more authority, like my presence was a placeholder. And one day, I opened an internal memo I wasn't meant to see. In it, Julian laid out a 5-year plan. Year 1 began with a phrase so clinical, it punched a hole through my chest. Founder transition for operational efficiency. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did what women like me have always done. I showed up. I put on my steel gray blazer, walked into the next board meeting, and looked each one of them in the eye. Half of them were men I had mentored. The other half had made fortunes off my patents. But when Julian stood and introduced his new leadership model, not one of them met my gaze. My son said, "Mom, maybe it's time we think about long-term sustainability instead of control." It was that word, control. He weaponized it like I'd been clutching the wheel out of fear. I hadn't. I'd held it because I knew what happened when women let go. I nodded. I smiled. I said I'd consider it. And the next morning they posted my graceful transition announcement on the company blog. Like I was a monarch handing over a crown, instead of a woman being quietly buried alive. The press loved it, called it historic, called me visionary. LinkedIn lit up with fake applause. Eleanor Ward steps aside to empower the next generation. There was no ceremony, no gold watch, not even a catered goodbye. Just a box of my things in the mail and a PR email thanking me for my inspirational tenure. Julian didn't call, not even a voicemail. I sat alone in the guest house I'd moved into, my name still on the mortgage, but no longer on the building's signage. And I stared at the last prototype I ever touched. A small, elegant diagnostic chip. Something that could have changed everything. He shelved it 6 months ago. Said it wasn't marketable. That was the moment I realized. My son wasn't just done with me. He was embarrassed by me. But here's what he didn't understand, and maybe still doesn't. When a woman survives as long as I have in tech, in boardrooms full of men who called me sweetheart while stealing my IP, she learns that real power doesn't scream. It waits. It watches. And when the time is right, it doesn't knock. It walks back in. I didn't storm out. I didn't write an op-ed or do the podcast circuit. I simply disappeared. Quietly. Elegantly. Like the end of a version of myself that was never meant to last. I wasn't done. I was just changing shape. People talk about silence like it's a void, like it's absence. But that's a lie. Silence has weight. It presses on the chest, hums in your ears. It builds. And if you're not careful, it reshapes you. After I stepped down, was pushed out, let's not pretend. I didn't go on vacation, or take up pottery like some of the more optimistic headlines suggested. No, I moved into the smallest apartment I'd lived in since my 20s. Just a 1-bedroom overlooking the edge of the bay, and I listened. Listened to earnings calls, investor murmurs, employee Glassdoor reviews. And beneath all the bravado of Wardline's next era, I heard something unmistakable cracking, the kind you can only hear when you built the foundation yourself. Julian assumed my silence meant surrender. That I'd aged out. That I'd finally accepted the new order. Him at the helm, me out to pasture. What he never considered was that I wasn't sulking. I was studying. Wardline's product pipeline had become bloated, directionless, obsessed with market optics. Julian had dropped the diagnostic chip, the one that could have saved lives, for a gamified wellness tracker aimed at venture-backed fitness influencers. He'd convinced the board it was innovation. What it was really was performance. The kind of performance you give when you've never had to prove yourself outside your surname. I watched his press appearances like a mother watching a son wear her clothes wrong. He had the shape right, but none of the stitching. The press called him dynamic, visionary, even had the gall to write that Wardline has never looked so young. I clipped that line and stuck it on my mirror. Not out of spite, out of clarity. They didn't see me anymore. Not the woman who pulled 70-hour weeks in a garage surrounded by solder fumes. Not the woman who coded an entire firmware update from a hospital bed after her gallbladder surgery. And certainly not the mother who spent Julian's childhood teaching him how to solder while blending soup with her free hand. They saw me as expired, archived. But what they failed to understand is that women like me don't expire. We evolve. And evolution, when done in silence, looks a lot like extinction, until it isn't. A month after my transition, I got an email from Maura Langston. One of my first hires, now long since retired after her own brutal exit. She said simply, "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Attached was a screenshot of a public beta test crashing mid-demo during a major conference. Julian standing on stage, deer-eyed, apologizing into a dead mic. I watched it 15 times. Not for schadenfreude, but for certainty. That was the moment I knew. Wardline had no anchor anymore. They were building for applause, not endurance. And Julian, my son, was performing competence, not practicing it. That distinction would cost him everything. And if I timed it right, it wouldn't cost me a thing. But before any of that, I had to vanish properly. No more quiet monitoring. I deleted my social media. Let the alumni panels and interview requests go unanswered. I left my name off the advisory boards. The illusion had to be complete. I let the world forget me so that, when I returned, I could move without resistance. Like a ghost through walls I once built. People underestimate the usefulness of being dismissed. It makes you invisible. And invisibility, when wielded by the right woman, is power most men will never see coming. Julian had won a public battle, but he'd forfeited the private war. You see, it wasn't just about taking something back. It was about remembering who I was before they trained me to play nice. Before boardrooms and bullet points. Before I learned how to dilute my instincts into something palatable. The real Eleanor. The one who hacked her first modem at 16 and lied her way into MIT labs at night. She wasn't mourning a company. She was sharpening. And the longer I said nothing, the more arrogant Julian became. He thought he'd erased me. But all he'd really done was give me time. When I first started sketching the diagnostic chip in the margins of my notepad, between board meetings that talked more about IPOs than impact, it wasn't meant to be a rebellion. It was survival. Every founder reaches a moment where she realizes the thing she built is no longer hers. For me, that moment came in a sterile conference room with a $300 fruit tray and a brand consultant, explaining why wearable health tech was sexier than preventative diagnostics. Julian didn't look at me once during that meeting. Not when I mentioned the cancer detection rates. Not when I brought up the licensing deal I'd been negotiating. He just tapped his pen like the adults were talking, and I was sentimental noise. So I stopped speaking. I let them dismiss the chip. Then I quietly made sure the prototype came with me when I left. I kept it in a black, velvet-lined case, nothing flashy. It sat under my desk for weeks after the exit. Every now and then I'd open it and just look. The thing was elegant. Fast. Laced with a proprietary microsensor that could detect biomarkers in saliva, with almost no margin for error. Years ahead of the market. But the board said it wasn't sexy. Said consumers wanted trends, not truths. Said health anxiety didn't sell. That word stuck with me, sexy. They wanted health tech that blinked and buzzed and told people how many steps they took, not something that might tell them they were dying. That's when I realized what Wardline had become. A company that didn't solve problems, it cosplayed solutions. Julian called it vision. I called it cowardice. I started reaching out to people I trusted. Not old allies. They'd been eaten alive or scattered to consultancy limbo. No, I went for the unglamorous ones. The overlooked. Maura connected me to a biotech engineer who'd been quietly building soil pathogen sensors for vineyards. Another woman, Ava, used to work at Wardline before Julian slashed her department in what he called an innovation pivot. She joined without asking about pay. Said, if you're building something real, I'm in. We didn't have an office. We had a windowless basement below a laundromat and 3 desks salvaged from storage auctions. But we had the prototype. And we had purpose. That was enough. We called it Marrow, because that's what it sought. The truth deep inside, not surface noise. It wasn't about disruption. It wasn't even about competition. It was about precision. We stripped it of aesthetics and focused on functionality. Within 2 months, we had early-stage testing results that outperformed every commercial tool on the market. And still I told no one. Not a leak. Not a whisper. Not even a shell company listing. We operated in total silence. Because this wasn't about noise, it was about timing. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to be necessary. There's a difference. Meanwhile, Wardline started to unravel in public. Julian's latest product, an AI-driven stress predictor, was pulled from shelves after a class action lawsuit. False positives. Panic attacks. Lawsuits. The cracks widened.
Morale plummeted.
But Julian did what he always did. He smiled through it. Bought another suit. Gave another TEDx talk. He even quoted me at one point. Called me his early inspiration. Said I taught him that adaptability is the cornerstone of leadership. I watched the clip in the basement one night and almost laughed. Almost. But there was too much work left to do. Too much heat in my chest to mistake it for anything but fire. Then one evening, a number lit up my phone that I hadn't seen in almost a year. No voicemail. Just a text. Julian, can we talk? I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I was surprised he'd reached out, but because he used the word can. Not need. Not want. Just can. Like he was testing the air. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I called Ava and told her to prepare the pitch deck. Not for funding. Not for partners. But for him. Because if Julian was reaching out, it meant one thing. He was drowning. And if he was drowning, I could choose how to throw the rope. Or if I did at all. 3 days later, he sent another message. Julian, I know you probably hate me, but I don't know who else to call. And there it was, the crack in his armor. The boy, not the CEO. The same boy who once asked me how computers think. Who held my hand backstage the day I rang the opening bell. Who looked me in the eye and lied to my face, thinking I'd never rise again. I replied with one sentence. Send me the numbers. He did. And they were worse than I expected. I didn't go to their office right away. I waited. 3 days. Then 5. Then a full week. I let his silence grow heavy. Let it sink teeth into his pride. He sent one more message. This time with no numbers, no pretense. Just 2 words. Please, Mom. I read it at 4:13 a.m., barefoot in my kitchen, the glow of the fridge casting long shadows. It was the first time he'd called me that since the day he stood at the board table and stripped me of my title. Not Eleanor. Not the founder. Not even you. Just Mom. The word tasted strange after so much dust. But it did something. Not soften me, not yet. But sharpen my resolve. Because now I knew. This wasn't a strategy call. It was a cry for help dressed in a business suit. And I never ignored those. I walked into the Wardline lobby exactly 12 minutes late. Not out of spite, but because I wanted to be noticed. The receptionist, a fresh-faced 20-something in high-gloss lipstick, asked if I had an appointment. I gave her my full name and watched recognition dawn across her face like a glitch in a system. She stammered. Called someone. Then another. Eventually, Julian came down himself. He looked thinner. Not elegant thin, but stress thin. Sleepless. He wore the same designer coat he used to joke made him acquisition-proof. But it hung wrong now. Wrinkled. Too large in the shoulders. When our eyes met, he didn't hug me. Didn't shake my hand. Just said, thanks for coming. I said nothing. Not because I hadn't rehearsed something, but because sometimes silence says more than any monologue ever could. He led me upstairs, past the glass offices and curated company slogans. Phrases I once wrote that now felt like strangers in my own handwriting. The conference room had changed. Sleeker now. Colder. But the bones were the same. I sat in the chair he used to claim was too stiff, and laid the Mero prototype on the table like a weapon. He stared at it. Didn't touch. Just said, "You kept working." I raised an eyebrow. "You stopped noticing." That landed harder than I expected. His shoulders dropped. "We're hemorrhaging," he confessed, eyes avoiding mine. "We're 6 months from collapse unless we get a buyout or a breakthrough." I nodded slowly. "You're hoping I can be both." He didn't deny it. That was smart. Because I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for leverage. I asked to see the full financials. Real ones. Not the sanitized pitch deck he'd probably sent to investors still chasing hype. He hesitated, then nodded to someone outside the room. A few minutes later, an analyst brought in a laptop and slid it toward me like a confession. I went line by line. Expenses bloated. R&D gutted. User trust decimated. Product velocity forced and manic. But buried near the end was something worse. He tried to resurrect the diagnostic tech. My tech. Without me. In a new form, stripped down and rebranded as CoreCheck. It was unstable. It had already failed 2 clinical reviews. "Why didn't you call me before?" I asked. He winced. "Pride." I leaned back. "Pride is expensive. But it doesn't have to be fatal." We talked for 3 hours. I offered no comfort. No easy fixes. Just strategy. A new roadmap that included only one viable path. Integration of Mero under my terms. He asked what those terms were. I slid over a slim, pre-prepared contract, signed by my lawyer dated that morning. He scanned it. His face shifted when he got to clause 17. "You want a board seat," he said.
No, Irraplia, calm.
"I want 2. One for me and one for a woman I trust. You don't get to rebuild this company with the same architecture that broke it." He looked at me like he was trying to decide if this was maternal or mercenary. But the answer was simple. It was survival. For both of us. He didn't sign right then. But he didn't throw it out either. That night, he walked me to the elevator like he used to as a boy, back when he thought every button lit up just for him. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked. I pressed the button and met his eyes. "Because you asked me as your mother, not your predecessor." The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. Before the doors closed, I added, "And because you're not the only one who needs to prove they're not obsolete." He didn't speak, but he watched me go. And in that silence, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But gravity. Enough to pull us back into orbit. Just long enough for what came next. The contract sat in Julian's inbox for 4 days. Long enough for him to rewrite it in his head a dozen different ways. I knew that rhythm, I invented it. The game of legal chicken founders play when they're drowning but don't want to be seen gasping. On the 5th day I got the call. Just a breath, a name, and then I signed.
No brevado. No preamble.
Just the weary tone of someone finally accepting they've been outmaneuvered. He didn't ask questions about the language, about clause 17, clause 23, or the quiet little insertion near the end marked retroactive stewardship rights. Most people would have missed it. Julian missed it too, because he was still playing the old game. The loud one. I had switched to a quieter, slower version. The kind that doesn't end in applause, it ends in rearrangement. We unveiled Mero as a legacy integration. That was the language Julian chose, and I let him have it. The press release mentioned me once mid-paragraph, framed as a strategic re-engagement with Eleanor Ward, Wardline's visionary founder. Visionary. That word used to matter to me. Now it just sounded like nostalgia dressed up as relevance. I didn't argue. I didn't correct it. Because that's how power works when wielded right. It doesn't need to be declared. It reveals itself in decisions. And within weeks, decisions began shifting. Product timelines bent around my calendar. Engineers started referencing old protocols I'd written in 2011. People whispered Eleanor's back in the corridors like a rumor. Even though I rarely left the glass office they gave me. The one Julian thought I'd refuse. I didn't. I just replaced the desk and had the locks changed. Julian adjusted the way people adjust to hurricanes. They brace, they smile, they act like they saw it coming. But I could see the strain. He started arriving earlier, staying later, asking me questions he should have known the answers to. Once he pulled me aside after a stakeholder call and said, "I just want to make sure this is still mine." I looked at him for a long moment. "You mean the company or the legacy?" He didn't reply, just blinked like maybe he hadn't thought to separate the two. But that's what this was really about. Not money, not product market fit, not even control. It was about whose name would echo louder when people told the story later. Julian wanted to inherit something clean, but what he got was something blood-wrapped, and I wanted him to feel it. 3 weeks later, the acquisition proposal landed. A major diagnostics conglomerate, bigger, colder, better resourced, offered a number Julian couldn't ignore. The board was giddy. Investors preened. Julian floated into meetings like a man reborn. "This is what we've been building toward," he said. Validation. I let him have his victory lap. Let him pitch and posture, and say all the right things. And then the night before the final vote, I asked to speak, just me and him. No boardroom. No suits. Just a quiet office with 1 lamp, 2 mugs, and a contract I printed myself. I slid it across the table. "You'll want to read Clause 27 this time," I said. His eyes narrowed. He read, then reread. And when he finally looked up, the blood had drained from his face. "You built this into the buyout structure," he said. "Retroactive co-founder designation?" I nodded. "It means they acquire my approval too." He tried to smile, but it broke halfway up his face. "This is revenge," he said softly. I didn't answer. Because it wasn't. Not entirely. It was a correction. A restoration. A reminder. I told him, "You were handed a legacy you didn't earn, and you turned it into a stage play. I'm not punishing you. I'm teaching you the weight of your own name." He didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, "So what happens now?" I leaned forward just enough for him to feel the gravity. "Now we accept the offer. But you don't get to leave the story clean. Your exit includes a clause acknowledging you as co-chair emeritus, ceremonial. I'll retain operational control for a 12-month transition. After that, you'll do whatever the hell you want. Just not here." He signed it. Not because he agreed, but because he'd finally learned what it meant to be cornered by someone who wasn't trying to win, but to teach. That night, I stood in the empty hallway outside the boardroom, the same one where he'd once cut me out like dead wood. I looked at my reflection in the glass, older now, sharper. Not softened by time, but honed by it. I didn't feel triumph. Just a kind of stillness. Like standing at the end of a war you never wanted to fight but fought well. Julian passed me on his way out, briefcase heavy in one hand, future heavier in the other. He paused. "You always play the long game," he said. I nodded once. "That's why I'm still here." The acquisition closed on a gray morning, the kind that softens the world at the edges. No confetti, no flashbulbs, just a quiet email from the legal team confirming what I already knew. That it was done. Wardline belonged to someone else now. The name would stay, for brand equity. My name would not. I asked that it be removed from all official history pages. No founder bio. No archive photos. When they asked why, I said, "Because legacy isn't what they write. It's what they feel when you're gone." I didn't want to be a footnote. I wanted to be a silence they couldn't quite explain. That was enough. I packed my office into 2 boxes.
No ceremony.
Just the prototype, a coffee mug from the 2010 launch, and a pen Julian gave me when he was 13. It still worked. Julian didn't come to say goodbye. I didn't expect him to. We'd said everything in the contract. But 2 days later, I found an envelope at my door. No stamp. No signature. Inside was a single photograph. Him, age 5, asleep under my desk, wrapped in one of my old cardigans. I remembered the day. The power had gone out. I'd worked by flashlight, and he refused to go to bed unless he was near me. On the back of the photo he'd written, "I know I forgot. I'm still learning how to remember." I sat down on the floor and held that photo like it was glass. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not in the way it used to. That was the twist of survival. You carry the scar, but one day you stop tracing it like a map. I moved into a smaller house by the water. Clean lines. Bare walls. It felt less like starting over, and more like clearing out a room that had never truly been mine. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving the city. Ava knew. Maura suspected. But the press never caught it. That was the point. I'd had enough noise. Enough headlines about comebacks and female founder resilience. They didn't know the truth that revenge, real revenge, is just the return of presence. I wasn't trying to hurt Julian. I was trying to remind him that legacy isn't inheritance. It's behavior. It's how you hold power when no one's watching. And more importantly, how you give it back. I taught him everything he knew. I just hadn't taught him what it costs. Some days he calls. Not often. Maybe once a month. The conversations are short. He updates me on what he's building, or what he's stopped trying to build. I listen more than I speak. He doesn't ask for advice, but he listens like he might need it. That's enough. We don't talk about the boardroom, or the contract, or what we both lost. I think he knows I wouldn't give him the comfort of pretending it never happened. But I don't give him bitterness either. Just space. Space to become something better than what I raised him to be. That's the hardest part of parenting, the second act. When you stop shaping and start witnessing. And when the child in front of you is also the man who took your name off the door, there's no script for that. One night, I walked down to the dock behind the house and dropped the pen he gave me into the water. It was heavy in my hand, cheap metal but weighted with memory. Sank quickly. Cleanly. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. It wasn't about mourning. It was about leaving room for something else. Not forgiveness. That's too pretty a word for what passed between us. But maybe peace. Maybe distance with dignity. I taught Julian how to build systems. He taught me how fragile they become when you trust them too much. Maybe that was the real legacy. Not the code. Not the patents. But the breaking and rebuilding of belief. Quiet. Constant. Incomplete. Like all the best things. People ask me now if I miss it. The spotlight, the company, the rush of relevance. I don't. What I miss is harder to name. The feeling of something unfinished humming beneath your ribs. The weight of a decision that hasn't yet been made. That was the thrill. Not the company. The becoming. Now, I wake up early, make tea, and write things no one will ever read. Not because I'm hiding, but because I finally understand. The only legacy worth leaving isn't the one they print. It's the one that makes them sit up straighter when they hear your name in a quiet room. That's mine now. And I don't need anyone's permission to keep it. If this story pulled something deep out of you, if it made you think about power, memory, or what we pass down without meaning to, take a moment to subscribe. These aren't just stories, they're quiet reckonings. And if you're still here, maybe you're ready for the next one. See you soon.